Hello, my name is Ken Kinter. I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University, and the purpose of today's video is to talk about smart recovery. So as always, feel free to like. Would love to hear your comments specifically about topics you'd like us to cover. If you like what you're hearing, go tell somebody, and feel free to subscribe as well. And of course, thank you for your time, which we appreciate. So just a little bit of business first. The project that I work for is called the State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative, and it is funded by the New Jersey Department of Health. Our mission is to improve the quality of care and the quality of working conditions at New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals, which would simply not be possible without the generous help, financial and otherwise, from the New Jersey Department of Health. So the objective of today's video is to talk about smart recovery. And full disclosure, there is no formal relationship between smart recovery and Rutgers University. However, we are helping to support the implementation of smart recovery in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals. This is just meant to serve as an introduction, just to give you some information about what smart recovery is. And we'll give you some pointers at the end about how to follow up on this if you want to know more about it. So the primary objectives here are to talk about smart recovery, to differentiate it from the 12-step model that you may be familiar with AA or NA. Talk about what smart recovery is, both in terms of its method and also some of the tools that come along with it, particularly the worksheets, which I've found very helpful. So we'll start off with the background is that smart recovery originally started as something called rational recovery and was initially presented as an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous, which we'll talk about the why of the alternatives later on. Rational recovery became smart recovery in 1994 and has grown in its acceptance and its use in not only in America, but also in other countries, and not only in correctional facilities, but in lots of other places, inpatient and outpatient as well. It's still very small compared to Alcoholics Anonymous, as you can see in the data below. However, it is growing. So you've probably seen this before if you're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous. These are the 12 steps, pretty classic, and has helped millions of people. I'm a big fan. However, there are some pieces of this that may be off-putting to some people, and I highlighted some of those. Some people aren't impressed with the whole idea of a higher power. Some people aren't that into the idea of God with the capital G, particularly the Judeo-Christian God, and the reference to that God as male. So these are some of the things that people have been critical about Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's part of the reason that some people have not taken it all that well. There are some other criticisms of Alcoholics Anonymous in that there isn't a very strong research base for it. And also that, and this is a valid thing, is that a lot of people who are involved in the 12 steps become very preachy about it to other people. So that becomes conflictual to some people as well. Some of the other things in AA that have been criticized are its emphasis on powerlessness, that you have to surrender, and that the disease model of addiction, which there is some controversy about whether it is purely a disease, part something else. That's not part of the discussion that we're doing here today. We have other videos on addiction as well if you want to look a little further into that. Another criticism has been the need for the person to refer to themselves as an alcoholic or addict, again, as part of that powerlessness and surrender. Some people really aren't into that so much. So one of the major differences between smart recovery and the 12-step model is that those 12 sequential steps that we just looked at, smart recovery more features of 4 non-sequential points, and you see them here: building motivation, coping with urges, problem solving, and lifestyle balance. These are not sequential. These are just all things that you can take on at your own desire. There really is no spiritual content in smart recovery. Whatever spirituality you bring is what you use. They don't necessitate people identifying themselves as an alcoholic or addict, and they really don't stress the disease model or the fact that someone needs to surrender to it. It's a little more autonomous, which I think appeals to some people. Now, smart recovery is both a thing and a combination of many other things brought together. So this is a quick and dirty list of a lot of the pieces that, if you put all these things together, comprise smart recovery. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which you also have another video about, is a very important part of this. Rational emotive behavior therapy, Stages of change, motivational interviewing. We also have videos about all these things. If you don't know what they are, you can check those out. The worksheets and the tools we're going to talk about later, I think, is something that Smart Recovery brings to the table, which is extremely helpful for people, both in an individual and in a group setting. It has a very structured setup for running groups, very similar to AA again. So the idea is that you don't have to be a professional or be trained in running groups to be able to do these groups. The structure is really handed to you, which I think is very helpful if you're running a program or if you're doing addictions groups and maybe people don't have the group background to be able to do, say, a process group. There's also a family and friends component, which is really important because there's no such thing as an addiction that does not involve multiple people, whether it's family or friends. Another piece that's incorporated in Smart Recovery are what's called SMART goals. Now, these two concepts are not necessarily related to each other. They don't come from the same place. You may have heard of SMART goals before, the idea that goals are specific, measurable, agreeable, realistic, and time-bound. You may have heard different words for those before. So part of Smart Recovery is SMART goals, but they are not the exact same thing. You can definitely see one without the other. So as we move through the rest of the slides, you're going to be seeing some of these worksheets, which are part of Smart Recovery. Some of them are from other places and they've been modified as part of Smart Recovery. To me, this is really the backbone of what Smart Recovery brings to the table, all of these forms, and we'll go through these as we go. For example, one of the real primary emphases of Smart Recovery is replacing irrational beliefs with more helpful, effective beliefs. Again, back to CBT and RABT again. So what we have here is an example of one of the worksheets of Smart Recovery called an ABC worksheet. And what we've done is we've made up a hypothetical scenario here of a gentleman who has a problem with alcohol, also problems with arguing with his wife, and problems in dealing with stress. So what this worksheet would look like for this person, we kind of gave the scenario here. The activating event or trigger is that he has an argument with his wife. The preceding beliefs that contribute to this trigger or activating event is his beliefs that I can't handle this, this is too much for me, my marriage, my life is over, and I need to drink to deal with the stress. So the combination of that activating event and those pre-existing beliefs, A and B, lead to C, the consequence of my irrational belief. He drinks, he says things, both of these create more problems, and then we go around the loop again. So that ABC you've probably seen before, very common to cognitive behavioral therapy. So now we move into D. Here's where it gets a little more interesting. So let's challenge those beliefs in B. So as opposed to I can't handle this, I've been through this before. As opposed to this is too much for me, my marriage is over, we fought lots of times before. As opposed to I need to drink to deal with the stress, my marriage is struggling and drinking makes it worse, but my marriage is still going. So D is the dispute of B. And then that leads to E. E is more effective beliefs. I can handle this without drinking. I've survived worse than this. My marriage will be better if I don't drink. There are better ways to deal with stress than drinking. So again, these are brand new beliefs. It's going to take a while for those to come in and take the place of B, but it's a good starting point. And just getting rid of the irrational part of those beliefs and dealing with what is, because the irrational beliefs are a huge part of what generates a relapse. So here we have another worksheet called the cost-benefit analysis worksheet, very similar to the payoff matrix and motivational interviewing. A really nice change here in that the focus is on the short term versus the long term. We'll get into that in a minute. So short-term benefits of drinking, same scenario with this gentleman. Drinking makes me feel better. I talk to other people and it ends the fight for now. That's the benefit in the short term. The costs, my wife gets angrier, I spend money, drunk driving. This doesn't address the problem. And now we have, okay, there's some medical problems that get involved. So in the bottom half, not using alcohol, benefits and costs. The benefits of not using, less to fight about, more money, my wife would be happier, be more effective in dealing with my problems, and I would be healthier. There are costs to not using alcohol, more stress, and getting out less. And one of these points is not only to do the pros and cons of drinking versus not drinking, but also to look at the short term and long term. We notice the short term, there are benefits short term, but then you see more of the consequences when you get into the long term, right? So the meta message that gets sent through doing this form is drinking appears to be helping you in the short term, but it's really setting up a lot of problems in the long term. So then that makes the argument for changing what you do. Change plan worksheet. Again, you've probably seen something very similar to this before. So here's the change I want to make. We do the importance and the confidence. Again, that's right out of motivational interviewing and stages of change. The most important reasons I want to make these changes, the steps I plan to take, other people that can help me. I will know the plan is working. And one of my favorite questions is some things that could interfere with my plan. I love asking, if this were not going to work, what would sink it? I always want to ask that because people know. So another interesting part of smart recovery is the DEADS worksheet. DEAD stands for deny or delay, escape, avoid, distract, and substitute. So again, how are we going to deal with urges? So we're going to talk about what the urges are. How can we deny them? How can we delay them? How can we interrupt them? What's something we can put in the way that will help stop us from going automatically into the relapse and avoid what Dr. Mate refers as the brain lock of addictions. I don't think, I just drink or just relapse. Escape. What triggers can I get away from and escape? In this case, the fights with the wife. What can I do rather than either instigate or continue a fight with my wife, which will cause an alcohol relapse or contribute to it? What can I do to avoid urges? What other activities? Addiction at its heart is really substitution, substituting behaviors, but also substituting thoughts that set up the feelings that set up the use. I could take a dog for a walk. I can also do some self-talk, do meditation, self-care, something along those lines. What tools can be put in place to substitute? I'm going to distract myself, walking the dog, talking to people I love instead of going out to the bar. And then, okay, wait a minute, and we'll get to this a little more later. There are other things. Not enough just to take the alcohol out of the person's life. What are we going to put in its place that's more adaptive and helpful? Oh, look, I have these old projects that I haven't gotten to. The drinking that got in the way of some of these other things. Let's bring some of these other things back in now. Substitutes for the addictive thinking or stinking thinking. I'm working, paying the bills down. Exercise is better than drinking. All of these other substitutive thoughts in addition to the substitutive behaviors. Disputing irrational beliefs or DIBs, very similar to the ABCDE. Here are the irrational beliefs that I bring. Let me ask, is this really working? Because of course, at some level, everybody knows it's not. And then substituting a new rational belief for the irrational belief. Again, very simple, 3 simple columns, but it's a process that a person goes through. Again, a person in active addiction tells themselves a lot of stuff that isn't true. We all tell ourselves a lot of stuff that isn't true, but the idea that becomes the mechanism for a relapse. So the hierarchy of values worksheet, what is important to that person? What are their values? And we see very strongly here, this person identifies as the state of their marriage is very significant to them. Finances, physical health, family relationships, and dealing with stress. This tells you what the person's motivations are. For someone else, this list may be completely different, but this is what moves this person. And then the hierarchy of values lends itself very nicely to this sheet that's on the right-hand side, which is the lifestyle balance pie. So this is incomplete. We just took these 5 things and put them on there, and then we graphed them out. So here are the important parts of that person's life, the thing that they really value. And then on a scale of 1 to 10, we see how do they feel that they're doing with those things? How much of this little graphic is toward the outside of the pie? How much pie is there, in a matter of speaking? And this pie could use a little help. And part of that's my drawing skills. But we see here that the person has taken each of the items in their hierarchy of values and moved them into these life categories and given a score. Which of these are good and which of these are bad? Now, this person really is very critical of the state of their ability to deal with stress and also the state of their marriage. Very low. So we got work to do there. Things like family relationships, health, finances, maybe a little better. But then this sets up the plan about this person's identified that marital stressors are one of the primary things that drives the alcohol use. and of course, vice versa. So how can we find another way to deal with this trigger or activating event to prevent relapse from happening? So, and this leads to the goal setting worksheet. So here we're targeting stress. I want to become better at dealing with stress. And the goal is I want to stop using alcohol to deal with these stress and marital problems. And here is the other part of SMART. I apologize, it's a little blurry. Specific, measurable, agreeable, realistic, and time-bound. So, okay, these are a little sloppy. It's in the order here. They're not that smart. A little smart, specific, measurable, agreeable, realistic, and time-centered. So now they're changing it again to revised goal. No drinking in the next 30 days. And here's the tasks that we're going to do. I'm going to walk away from arguments with my wife. I'm going to walk the dog. I'm going to call family and friends if I'm feeling stressed. I'm going to review the SMART sheets, and I'm going to go to SMART meetings. That is my plan to be able to stop this toxic relationship between drinking and negative impact on the marriage. Then there's another life category you can put underneath that and fill that out from there. Now, this plan undoubtedly will undergo some changes and some revisions as it goes, but it's really organizing the change plan. So an urge log is exactly what it sounds like. When were the urges? How severe were they? How long did they go? How were they triggered? So you get to look for patterns, patterns in terms of time, patterns in times of stressors, patterns in terms of how that person's doing as far as responding to urges. Not the only progress is not necessarily abstinence. So this gives you another way of looking at those things. Another really interesting thing about SMART recovery is this vital, absorbing, creative interest. It's putting the things back into the person's life that the addiction probably replaced along the way. Again, substituting something good and healthier for something that was maybe not so healthy and good for that person. So we get some of these projects going, put something healthy back in that person's life that will substitute for the addiction and also help them move forward in other areas of their life. One of the differences between recovery and abstinence is that it's much more transformative of the whole person. It's not just about the addiction per se. So just to cover some of the major points here, SMART recovery is developed, more evidence-based, non-spiritual alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous. However, as we've seen, it's taken on sort of a life of its own. It's becoming its own thing, which is good. One of the major points about it is having these 4 non-sequential points versus the 12 sequential steps of AA and the AA's derivatives. The SMART recovery is as an accumulation or an aggregate of a bunch of evidence-based practices sort of melded together in the form of these really cool worksheets, which can be, again, be done in SMART meetings, akin to AA meetings, or that person can do more of it individually. And a lot of those forms are located free, online that you can pull down and work on. SMART recovery is growing, particularly in correctional facilities and in non-religious nations. Again, if God is an issue for a person or for a group or for a nation, then that sort of clouds their ability to get into the 12-step and AA type thing. And that's one of the reasons why these other things have come around. So what I just wanted to say in closing about this is that, first of all, I'm a big fan of the 12 steps, and I'm a big fan of that whole system. However, there is no one treatment approach that helps everyone. So I love having this other solution in there. If I see someone starting to pull back at the idea of God or, any of these other things that might be disagreeable to people about the 12 steps, we talk about the SMART recovery piece. If I already know someone is into CBT and all those kinds of things, that might be more what their speed is. Again, we want to have the door open for people to come into recovery, regardless of what their pre-existing belief system is. So I'm a big fan of it. And again, if you were thinking about doing this sort of recovery work, either yourself or in your agency, I would definitely encourage you to go to the smartrecovery.org. They have a number of trainings for both professionals and for lay people or for students. I would definitely advise taking the courses and making yourself knowledgeable about it. It's another great tool in your toolkit in working with people with addictions. I also included the AA link in here as well, in case you wanted some background information on Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, I thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure doing these things. I hope they help. Again, feel free to comment, please share. And we'll definitely like to be able to see you attend and see future videos. So take care, be well. Bye-bye.